Well, good evening, everyone. This is Mike Hoffmeyer, President, U.S. Chess, and we're glad to have you here this evening for this, new delegate seminar. Some of you may have been delegates before and are steely-eyed veterans at it. And some of you, this is your first time, and some of you may be alternate delegates, possibly waiting to be appointed by your state or planning to attend the conference with a view toward getting appointed by an adjacent state, as is allowed by our bylaws. I'm going to introduce the folks that will be on the call this evening participating in things. First, you can see Mike Neatman. Mike, wave there, buddy. There's Mike. Mike's up in Wisconsin. Mike's a former executive board member. How many years, Mike? 10? 10. Yep. And he's he's been president of Wisconsin Chess forever. So and in probably 10 years before that. So Mike's been running Wisconsin Chess for a long time. We also have joining us from Oklahoma, Chuck Undra, who's our vice president for finance. In addition, we have David Hayter, Georgia, who's an executive board member at large, and Dr. Fun Fong, also from Georgia, who's another member at large. And so what we're going to do this evening is we're going to discuss several topics with you. And I won't be doing much of the talking at all, except maybe to add a few things or to prompt one of the speakers with a question. We're going to let the speakers, that I just introduced, do the talking. And before I do forget, and for many of you, you can probably see our executive director, Carol Meyer. She's up in, she'd be, she's monitoring the presentation. And actually, Carol's the one who really put this whole presentation together for us, pulling in a lot of her, not only her experience with U.S. Chess, but her very, very considerable experience in nonprofit organizations. So you can see here what we're going to cover. I'm not going to read a slide to you, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mike Neatman. And Mike, you got the floor.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to be talking about delegates, what they are, what they do here. First of all, we're going to start out with a map here. And according to the U.S. Chess bylaws, we have 52 state chapters. So some of you may say, wait a minute, we only have 50 states in the Union. Where did the other two come from? Well, in addition to every state having one, we're a little ahead of Congress right now, and we have named the District of Columbia as a state. So we've added that as a separate state, and they are allotted one delegate. Also, in our bylaws, large states, I can't remember the exact threshold, are able to divide themselves up. And I believe the last time I checked, New York, Texas, and California had enough members, U.S. Chess members, to be able to split, but only 5,000 members is the threshold, okay, I'm being told. Only California has decided to split. So we have a Northern California and a Southern California. And many moons ago, they got together and decided on the demarcation line between the two. And basically, it's a set of zip codes between them. So when we talk about state affiliates, U.S. Chess has 52 of them. And delegates are named by the state chapters. So California has 2 state chapters. District of Columbia has a state chapter as well. Okay. Next slide there, Mr. Mike. All right. According to our bylaws, and again, these are all defined in our bylaws, there are several different what we call flavors of delegates. We have delegates, alternate delegates, additional alternate delegates, delegates at large, and then additional delegates. What are each of those? Well, first of all, we have 125 delegates. And those are a portion, I should say, amongst the 52 state chapters. Now, there's some special rules in there. Every state gets at least one delegate. And if you have 1,000 U.S. Chess members, you're guaranteed to have at least 2 delegates. All right. In addition to the 125 delegates named by the states, all executive board members are also delegates. They do not count against their own state's allocation. So they are above and beyond the 125. In addition, we ask that each of the states, when they're naming their delegates, give us the names of the equal number of alternate delegates, one for every delegate. The additional alternate delegates, that is reserved for former life voting members in previous versions of our bylaws. I can't remember how many we have of those, but there aren't too many of those with us any longer. All right.
And Mike, you said additional alternate delegate. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a
it's just an addition. They're just additional delegates, and not additional alternate delegates.
Additional delegates are down below. I'm going to get to that.
Oh, I see what you're talking about. Okay, I got it.
Okay. All right. Delegates at large is the next bullet point there. Delegates at large are two flavors of those. Former presidents of the Federation who served 2 consecutive terms are elected as delegates at large. And then also individuals who have performed distinguished service. Now in that last half there, we can have a maximum of 20. We don't have near 20 right now. We've got maybe, I don't know, about a dozen or so right now. And then additional delegates are reserved for 5 former delegates who are elected at the U.S. Chess membership meeting that is held on the Friday before the delegates meeting, the day before the delegates meeting. So 5 former delegates who are not delegates currently or for that year can be elected by the members to be delegates at the delegates meeting for that year. All delegates and alternate delegates are voting members for U.S. Chess Executive Board elections. So if you have not registered to vote in the U.S. Chess Executive Board elections, you will be sent a ballot and registered by the office. Okay.
Mike, in your experience, how often does this additional delegates, the one that are the 5 reserved, how often does that get exercised? Pretty much every year, right?
That gets exercised every year. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be submitting a motion, Mike, right at the start of the membership meeting, and I'll have 5 names. Hopefully, I'll have 5 names anyway to give you for that. So show up at the they need to be former delegates within the last, I believe it's 5 years or something like that. And current members, of course, and attending the membership meeting. Okay. All right. Your term, if you're a delegate, named a delegate or an alternate delegate, your service is 1 year. It's an annual appointment. Now, we do ask the states to give us those names of delegates and alternate delegates by November 1st for the following year. You'll notice the deadline there is in quotes. It's quite often the case that we see that states, I won't say procrastinate, but delay giving us the names until later in the year, closer to the delegates meeting, until they know who's going to be attending. They don't want to name somebody as a delegate on November 1st, and then come June 1st, find out that that particular person is not going to be attending the delegates meeting at the US Open. So sometimes we don't get those names until the spring or sometime in the spring. But it is in the bylaws that the states are supposed to name their delegates by November 1 for the following year. Again, this is an annual appointment and you do serve until replaced. Now it's important that for delegates, if you are a delegate and you cannot serve, if you're not going to come to the US Open, we ask that you resign your delegate spot so that we can then, from the office perspective, go back and look at who the alternate is for your state and then promote that alternate to the delegate spot. And the way to do that, to resign your seat, you need to, in writing, send an email to governance@uschess.org. And that will go to our governance coordinator, Jen Pearson, in the office, who will handle that for us. Once again, it's governance@uschess.org.
I know typically what I see done is like the state president might collect up the letter of resignation and a letter from another person who, like the alternate, saying, hey, I'm available, I'm going to be there, so I commit to being there. And then the president of the chapter might send the delegate's resignation letter and the note from the alternate saying, hey, I want to be activated off the alternates list. And he just sends those together to the governance email address that Mike showed there.
Right. So again, these are delegate and alternate delegates are calendar year appointments. The additional delegates elected at the membership meeting serve until June 1 of the following year. And then delegates at large actually have a 3-year term, and they can be renewed every 3 years. Okay. Next slide there, Mike. There we go. All right. Resources, key documents. You should, as delegates and alternate delegates, been snail mailed a copy of the delegates call. It's this black document here, and a picture there on the screen as well. If you do not see that, you can go to uschess.org and under governance, or under about and then governance, you will see a link for the 2021 delegates call there. If you are attending the meeting, you should read that document and know what's in it. The agenda for the meeting is in there. There are a few reports. Committee reports are in there as well. The bylaws are in there for reference because usually a number of advanced delegate motions, ADMs we call them, are bylaws related, so we need to have a copy of the bylaws quickly available to us. It also includes a section called Delegates Actions of Continuing Interest, or as we call them, DACIs, D-A-C-I, DACI for short. They are important motions that previous delegates meetings have passed. They don't rise up to the level of bylaws, so they're not in the bylaws, but they're just really important motions that we want to remember from year to year. So we include that in the section called DACIs, Delegates Actions of Continuing Interest. Other important documents to know are the Articles of Incorporation. Those are not in the delegates call. I did go out to the website last night. They are on the governance page of the website. We are an Illinois-based company, corporation, and there's actually a PDF out there from the Secretary of State of the State of Illinois when we redid our Articles of Incorporation a couple of years ago. And then there's also a link on the governance page for the conflict of interest policy. We'll be talking about that here in just a couple of slides. But all delegates that will be attending do need to fill out the conflict of interest policy. Your delegates call is really your delegates meeting roadmap. So you can, if you don't have a copy of that, you can go out to the website and find that. Oh, all right, you already moved on to the next one.
Yeah, I know a lot of people typically will have their laptop with them in the meeting. And if you got the PDF version of the delegates call up, it's really easy to word search and find stuff instead of trying to flip through the delegates call and look for things.
All right, let's see here. Oh, there we go. Okay. It's really important to understand that USChess governance is a shared responsibility between the delegates and the executive board. The delegates have certain responsibilities and the executive board has certain responsibilities, and these are all outlined again in the bylaws. So from the delegates' perspective, we are the legislative body of the organization. We control the rules of chess. If for some reason we want the knight, the little horsey, to move like a bishop and a bishop to move like the little horsey, we can do that. We won't be very popular if we do that, but we have the capabilities of doing that. Controlling the physical assets such as the building in Crossville, Tennessee is under the domain of the delegates. The delegates have several committees that they appoint, the audit committee, the bylaws committee, the election ethics, and a new committee that was started up last year, the nominating, or I thought it was nominations, but okay, nominating committee. There's 8 members on that, and the delegates are able to appoint biannually, it's a 2-year term, 6 of the 8 members. The executive board appoints the other 2. The delegates also have the ability to, or the right, I should say, responsibility to approve the budget. Just for your edification, the fiscal year of USChess starts on June 1st. So when we meet in the first week of August, we are actually 2 months into the fiscal year. So hopefully the delegates don't change the budget too much, otherwise the office is going to have to scramble to come under budget for the 10 months. Okay, executive board now also has a lot of responsibilities outlined in the bylaws, providing leadership continuity, management oversight. They have the sole responsibility of appointing the executive director and evaluating her progress. set strategic direction. I know when I was on the board for 10 years there, pretty much every year we took one day to really go through the strategic direction of the Federation. And then at every subsequent meeting, spent several hours at least reviewing that, if not a day, reviewing that strategic direction decisions that we had made. The executive board also appoints and oversees several committees. You'll see a list of that later in the slides here. They also serve as the complaint or appellate body. Several of the committees, such as ethics, TDCC, Tournament Director Certification, one of the FIDE committees have sanctioning capabilities.
Yeah,
and rules, yeah. And if the offended feels that they were not properly served by the committee's decision, they have the ability to appeal to a higher body, which is the executive board. So in that respect, they're the Supreme Court, I guess, of the Federation. So again, the legislative body of U.S. chess is the delegates. They determine policies that govern U.S. chess and all of its activities. I won't quote all of the articles and sections in the bylaws for executive board responsibilities, but in addition to what's listed there, they authorize special promotional memberships, terms, and rates. They can revoke or suspend memberships for a good cause. They also serve as delegates, as I mentioned earlier. Last year, we had to call a special delegates meeting because we couldn't meet in person. And a special delegates meeting is actually a separate whole section in the bylaws, as opposed to a regular delegates meeting that we're having this year that's in person. And the president or 50% of the board plus one member has the ability to call a special delegates meeting. Last year, it was unanimous. The entire board, while I was on it, voted to hold a special delegates meeting. They also have the responsibility as the board of directors of U.S. Chess, administrative and managing body of U.S. Chess, and is vested with full power to conduct all business for U.S. Chess. They can appoint other officers, including, in addition to the executive director and CFO, they can appoint legal counsel, designate where an office is located, appoint a permanent FIDE delegate, I think also zonal president, correct, Mike?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Approve depositories and signatories of U.S. chess funds and engage an auditor annually. That's important since our fiscal year ends on May 31st. There's a 2-month gap in there before the delegates meeting, and I would say 9 years out of 10, we usually have the audited financials available for the delegates at the delegates meeting. Sometimes it's been right on the last day, but we got it to them. So that's our goal every year. All right, last slide for me. All right. Again, delegates also, and the board, also are U.S. chess fiduciaries. So if you're not familiar with that term, let's talk about that for a little bit here. Fiduciary's duty is a duty of loyalty and a duty of care. What does that mean? Well, a duty of loyalty means no personal gain. So the business that you're conducting as a delegate cannot afford you a personal gain in some fashion. If you have any conflicts of interest, you need to disclose those. It does not mean that if you do have a conflict of interest, you can't be a delegate. It just means that you may not be able to vote on certain things to come up that would involve the conflict of interest. Information, remember, is privileged and confidential that you gain as being a delegate. As far as being in duty of care, act in good faith and act in the best interest of the organization. So again, the delegates share directors' powers with the executive board, and as such, both are fiduciaries. Other duties are confidentiality and obedience. I've got a quote here from Black's Law Dictionary's definition of a fiduciary, and it's a quote, "A person having duties involving good faith, trust, special confidence, and candor towards one another," end quote. So basically, what does that mean? It means you have to put the corporation's interests above your own. That's loyalty. And you have to make informed decisions in a prudent fashion. That's care. From a duty of loyalty, also no personal gains, disclose those conflicts of interest, board information being privileged and confidential. From a duty of care standpoint, again, act in good faith, best interest of the corporation, and from a duty of obedience, follow your organizational governance documents. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Mr. Unruh to talk about finance. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mike. My name is Chuck Unruh, and it's been my honor to serve as your Vice President of Finance for this year. And a little bit about my background is I've been involved with U.S. chess finances since 2004. And we have seen vast improvements and complexity. Now, as a delegate coming in, you'll be asked to do another duty that wasn't mentioned on the slide, and that is elect the Life Member Asset Trust. That is a delegate election. We have 11 trustees that care for the life member assets and grow these assets to reimburse life member services in the future. So delegates are responsible for that. Now there will be recommendations coming from the chair of the Life Member Asset Trust. So, you know, that is a very important part or duty that you have as a delegate. The other, as mentioned by Mike, was the budget. Now we'll prepare the budget, and then the budget goes to the workshop. Now our finance workshop has been the same year after year after year on Friday from 1 to 3 o'clock. The budget is actually prepared internally by the staff in cooperation with the executive board and of course the finance teams. Now, what finance teams do we have? We have finance committee. We have the audit committee. This is not where one person is doing all the work. US Chess has become quite complex, and we have committees, 2 investment committees, and then of course the LMA investment committee. So there are plenty of committees that deal with finance. Now, as delegates, where do you get your information? Well, we will post quarterly results, meaning balance sheet, income statement, cash flow statements. And now these quarterlies are on our fiscal year. So they're a little different than the calendar year. And remember what Mike had to say about the fiscal year. It starts June 1st, ends May 31st. So in that, we will prepare and have that posted so that you as a delegate can go in and actually, for yourself, look at the reports and make an opinion of our finances. Now, we don't leave everyone in the dark. There will be reports as to the general care and stability of the corporation. We'll have reports by my office every month. In fact, we post at least every quarter, but there are monthly financial reports, and they give direction and key parts to our financial picture. So we really don't have to get out the Accounting 101 books. We'll lead you through it. And if you want to go deeper into the weeds, well, of course, the information's there. Now, at the end of the year, our auditors produce a 990 tax return. Our auditors serve a very, very crucial insurance that we are correctly assessing the corporation. They look over our shoulders and determine what is restricted, what isn't restricted, how we will prepare our tax return for the IRS. And it's quite a complex document. The 990 at times is more than 30 pages. On top of all this, we have started another program, and that program is a part-time CFO. And this part-time CFO staff looks over the shoulder of all of our finance committees, offers us opinion, recommendation, and produces their own report. So yes, as I've been told in the past by my accountant, you'll always see the train that hits you. We have that type of information, but thankfully we know what's going on. And the history is well documented. There was a time 20 years ago where we didn't have the internet or have the transparency of today. And it would take 3 or 4 months to get information. That's not the case today. Usually, as soon as a month closes, 2 weeks afterward, we will have information and you will see it posted. So what are your duties? Well, we really want to look at the budget. We want to make sure that that we're on mission and that the budget fits the type of resources we have as a company or as for the mission. So that's a little bit how all this integrates together, and hope to meet all the new delegates in New Jersey.
And one of the things that Chuck spearheaded this past year was transitioning our budget from a 1-year horizon and now looks out 2 years. So we have this rolling 2-year budget process that we go through so that we're not, and especially that helps us because a lot of the FIDE events occur every other year. So you get this lopsided budgeting that occurs 1 year, there's not much FIDE activity, and the next year is a whole lot of it. So going to a 2-year budget process lets us look further out and, you know, and do the programmatics in the current year as we look forward 2 years. Okay. Thanks,
right.
Chuck. Appreciate it. Okay, we're going to turn it over to David Hayter.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dave Hayter, one of the executive board members at large. I've got a couple things I want to talk about, and it's primarily for new delegates, what you can do to orient yourself when you arrive, what types of resources you can find at the site, where you can go to get some of your questions answered. Chess Control will be set up for the tournament, but it's also a resource for governance. So you should know where Chess Control is and know the hours of Chess Control, because if you have some kind of question that you need answered, that's a great place to go and get your question answered. And if they can't answer it, they will find you the person who can answer it. So Chess Control is manned during certain hours of the tournament, and it is a tremendous resource for you. Jen Pearson is our governance coordinator. She will give you your credentials. When you get your credentials, they are to you as an individual. Don't share your badge. It's for you. When you vote, you will hold up your credential. That's your way to vote. That's why you need to hold on to it, and that's why you do not share it with others. We've already kind of talked about the rules that govern delegate resignations. If a delegate's not going to show up, they can resign, and then an alternate can be appointed from their state president or from a contiguous state. The badge and the materials, they will be available on August 4th, which is Wednesday. Again, Jen Pearson will have those and we'll give those out to everyone. And you should pick those up as soon as you arrive. One of the reasons you should pick up your credentials is because, you know, you will have information. I'll talk about, we've already talked a little bit about the delegates call. Many have been mailed it. You should bring that with you if you already have it. The DASIs will be printed out there. Let's move on to the next slide because I think we're about to talk about some of those things. So on the back of this publication is the schedule of events. Now, that schedule is only as good as the date and time that it was printed. So there's going to be some changes. The changes will be in your credentials. There'll be a piece of paper that has the revised schedule. So you want to know what interests you. You look at this schedule, figure out what you want to attend, because you can't attend everything. There's things that exist side by side, and sometimes you have to make hard choices. You want to attend both meetings, but you can't. We try to serve as many diverse communities as we can, and we try to make sure that the most popular meetings don't go against each other necessarily, and try to divide the meetings in such a way that makes sense. But invariably, somebody that's very interested in U.S. chess governance is going to look and say, oh, I want to go to both of these. Well, unfortunately, you'll have to make a choice. And we'll give out the revised schedule there when you sign for your credentials. One of the things I'd like to point out,
as an example, what David's talking about, this block up here called Tournament Director Certification Committee, that whole block is gone because the TDCC did their workshop online last week. Merritt Thorpe and Jeff Weewell, neither of whom, the chair and the vice chair of the committee, neither of whom could be at the conference, asked. So we decided to try as an experiment to see how doing a workshop online works, and it really worked, very well. So that time right there has been freed up, and I know some other things have already been put into some of the places that are there. Thanks, David.
A couple things I'd like to highlight on here. One is the awards reception, which is Friday at 4 o'clock. We used to have an awards luncheon on the first day of the delegates meeting, and you'd have a long lunch. That we're not doing now. Now there's an awards reception. So instead of a full meal, reception, kind of hors d'oeuvre type things, I recommend that you go to the awards reception, because you probably will know someone that's being recognized. Show up and congratulate them for their hard work and what they're being recognized for. The other thing I'd like to point out, the delegates meeting proper is Saturday and Sunday, the 7th and 8th of August. Now this year it's interesting. We do not have nearly the amount of advanced delegate motions that we normally have. I'll be interested to see just how long this delegates meeting lasts, given that we have far less motions, but the meetings tend to occupy the time available. So I'm sure we'll find something to occupy our time, and there may be motions that come up from the floor. Now, part of the reason that is interesting is, particularly for the rules of chess, which we've talked about the delegates control, a motion that is in advance has a lesser threshold of approval, meaning majority vote, than a motion from the floor. And typically, motions from the floor get referred to committee. We don't like to make rash decisions, and we would like to have the committee that has responsibility for that subject matter give advice on the proposal that is coming forward. So you can see that there's a bunch of committee meetings Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. That's where a lot of the pre-work for the delegates meeting gets done. The other thing I'll point out, the Chess Trust, which is separate from US Chess, but they have their own meeting from 4 to 6 on Thursday, August 5th. And then there's some executive board meetings. Some are open, some are closed. You can see a couple of those on Thursday morning. There'll be a closed session to start with at 9 a.m. and then will be an open session. If you want to come see how sausage is made, you want to see how your executive board is serving you, the members, and you, the delegates, come see an open session. With that, let's go to the, I should mention the workshops. I did mention those a little bit. Most of the workshops are intended to be a dialogue. So if you have something that you're interested in, the place to hash a lot of that out, we don't want to do committee work on the floor of the delegates meeting. Having a well thought out plan and proposal that the delegates can listen to and that has a vote of approval, if you will, from the committee, or you hash out some disagreements, you hash out language, that can be done in committee, very similar to the way Congress works. You know, the committee hashes it out, they come up with something, then they can bring it to the floor. It can still be amended, of course, but you want to do as much of that pre-work in advance as you can. It's a much more efficient way to run an organization. We've talked a little bit about the committees that are appointed, and then some are elected by the delegates. So the ones that are elected will be elected on Saturday and Sunday as part of an agenda item. The ones that are appointed will be appointed in all likelihood at one of the executive board meetings at the US Open. So probably the closed meeting on Sunday, August the 8th. That's usually our organization meeting where we elect the officers and appoint some committees. If you are interested in serving on a committee of US Chess, I recommend you email the current chair of that committee and express your interest. That would be a way of letting it be known that you're interested in serving. Otherwise, the appointments get made and you may lose that opportunity if you were so inclined.
Yeah, I would add to what David said, that if you are going to volunteer for a committee, and I know Garrett can attest to this very much, is that your time is expected, you know, to participate in activities by email, participate in activities by phone or Zoom discussions. So it's not like, oh, well, gee, I'm going to get on this committee so I can put in my signature block. You know, I'm a member of XYZ committee for US Chess. If that's your aim, it's the wrong aim. The aim should be that I've got something to contribute. I want to contribute, and I commit myself to participating in that committee's activities, because that's really, really important that you do that. Because if you don't, and you're just a name, you know, on the executive board, when we get ideas or we have motions, sometimes we'll refer them to a committee. And we really don't like it when it comes back to the executive board and there's, say, 12 members in the committee and you get, 7 people voted and 5 people didn't. That's just not good.
Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, so we've already talked about the committees. So there will be elections in the delegates meeting of audit, bylaws, the conflict of interest committee. That'll be at the front end of the meeting. Election, ethics. Chuck already talked about life member asset trust. The nominating committee is a 2-year term, so we did that last year, so we won't need to do that this year. And then you can see most of the committees are executive board appointed. And they assist the executive board in the governance, and they're really help develop ideas and programs and serve as subject matter experts for their various areas of expertise. US Chess couldn't run efficiently without these committees. And they also, I mean, if you have an interest or an expertise, I highly recommend you volunteer, send a note to the committee chair, and then that's how you join one of the committees, if you will. And sometimes I have seen it where people volunteer for a committee and they're not selected right away. And that's no indication of the merit of the person. You want to keep the committees manageable so that they can get their work done. You don't want committees of 20, 30 people. You wouldn't get any work done. So sometimes it's the case for some of the more popular committees that they have more people that want to be on the committee than are needed. And sometimes it can take a year or 2 or more before people cycle through. But we always want to have our volunteers serve the interests of the Federation. So if you are particularly interested in one of these, again, send a note to the current committee chair, because that process of identifying who will be on the committee next year is ongoing right now. There was a question, is there a particular committee that tends to need volunteers? Not sure how to Most of our committees, I believe, are relatively stable and have the number of people on it that are needed. There's always some transition from year to year. I think most of our committees are pretty effective. I know that Scholastic Council and Committee tends to be popular. Some of the ones that TDCC tends to be popular. Rules, there's some finance committees that we want people with certain levels of expertise in. Some people that may have an expertise in accounting or CPAs tend to gravitate towards those committees. Development for fundraising. So it really, if you are interested, again, just express your interest. And you may not get on the first year, but that's part of the way you make yourself known. You start attending meetings at the US Open, and there is a sort of natural transition, and there's always some turnover. And having a bench of people, of quality people, is just really helpful for the organization.
Garrett, you had a question? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
There we go. Senior committee is not listed. Is that correct?
Senior is actually a subcommittee of the programs committee. And also women's chess is also one of those subcommittees, as is military.
I understand. Thank you.
So some of the subcommittees may not have been listed. That was done a year or so ago. So we had programs you can see on the upper right is the overarching committee, and then there's areas of expertise under programs.
And what David said about what David said about these the executive board relying on his committees, we really, really do. As an example, the all the endorsements for the algorithms that are used by Lee Chess, Professor Regan, chess.com, and ICC, the ratings committee spearheaded that process of looking at those, because the ratings committee's got the PhD statisticians that can really look under the hood and tell if they're there. So they took care of that process. And as another example, we frequently will get issues involving state chapters or issues involving affiliates. And so we'll pass those down to the states and affiliates committee and ask them for an opinion. Is there a trend or anything like that? So these committees get used. And, as I mentioned Garrett before, but I'll mention him again. The one that the executive board really has a close relationship with is the Scholastic Council. The committee has about 30 members in it, or roughly. And then there's a council that is elected by the members of the Scholastic Committee. And that council, I think, has 7 members on it. And the council represents scholastic interests from across the country. And the executive board frequently will rely on them for things. And as a matter of fact, they wrote the rules for the online National Scholastic Championships that we had about 2 months ago. Those came up through the Scholastic Council and then got reviewed and approved by the executive board after our director of events, Boyd Reed, had a chop on them and so forth. So
now you can see, and they started to add some of the subcommittees of programs. They added women's, military, and senior. The other 2 under programs are college chess and accessibility and special circumstances. Those are subcommittees under programs. And there's an acronym on there that I probably should let you all know about. PPHB is Professional Players Health and Benefits. So when people donate to that fund, and they can pay extra for extra Grand Prix points, that money goes into a fund, and then a professional player can make application to that fund to assist them in time of need for if they have medical issues or health and benefits. That's what that fund is for. Okay, I think fun's next.
Okay, well, thank you for the other colleagues for letting me participate and wrap this thing up. And here you can see what the delegate process is like. You have Alex Relea speaking here at a mic. You see Beatrice Marinello and Danny Rhodes speaking. Typically, only one would be speaking. That could be a committee report. I'm not really sure what the situation was there, but
Yeah, it was probably a
typically,
for Mike or an against Mike.
yes, typically we have a for mic in the front and an against mic in the back. The president is nominally the presiding officer of the meeting or his designate. I've never seen a designate, I don't think. Let's see, what else can I say here? Once again, refer to your delegates call here. It has just about most everything that you might need to help participate in the meeting. Particularly, also look for handouts for emergency motions and things of that sort that may hit the floor. You'll see a lot of petitions for new executive board candidates. They may be circulating them during the delegates meeting, since that's an easy way to get all the delegate requirements for signature. And get to know the other names of your delegates. It's good to go over all these ADMs ahead of time and discuss this with delegates that you know, and maybe even those that you don't know. You may want to go ahead and what we used to do in Georgia is we used to discuss it as a delegation. The Georgia group used to review these ADMs before we actually voted, or you may want to, there could be even a larger caucus that you may want to get with to try to understand these things. That could happen when we have organized campaigns for and against motions there.
As David said, when the meetings are occurring of some of the committees, the workshops, if you have a specific interest in one or more of those ADMs, that advanced delegates motion is probably going to get talked about in that committee. They don't talk about all of them. They only talk about the ones that are of interest to them. For example, if the delegates call had in it some changes to the rules of chess, the rules workshop would definitely talk about them. And they would be talking about all the different aspects of the rule, and they would do a straw vote, as David mentioned. And that would be your chance as a delegate, and even as a member, not necessarily as a delegate, to kind of voice an opinion on the rule that's being, discussed in that, in that workshop. So they take a straw vote. And like David mentioned, when a straw vote comes back and says that a committee's against it, it's probably got snowball's chance in hell of passing. When the committee comes and says, 90 or more percent of the people voted for it, then that one, it's showing some strength, and that people like it.
Yes, and one thing that we didn't mention is that if you really are interested in a committee, it's good to participate in that workshop to actually express interest and participate in meaningful discussion. And so, yes, a lot of opinions are made within that relevant committee as to whether or not they approve or disapprove or have no opinion of a particular motion there. Quorum is usually taken at the very beginning of the meeting. It is typically only a third of the delegates present. So usually that is not hard to meet. That's a pretty low threshold to meet. On occasion, if meetings go long, then sometimes we'll have a loss of delegates, and someone will try to ask for a quorum to see if we really still have a quorum. We talked about mics for and against in the back of the room. And we are using Robert's Rules of Order. The most current one is the 12th edition here, the white book. And it also incorporates rules regarding electronic meetings and that sort of stuff too. So it's been revised in that regard. That's the major revision for this edition here. Mike Nolan is our parliamentarian, succeeding our late Ken Ballou. And we have basically,
typically, when we're the most frequent violations of Robert's Rules of Order that we see is one action is in the process of being discussed and somebody changes the topic to something else and it gets ruled out of order because we haven't voted on that one yet, or there's an amendment and the amendment has to be voted on before the actual ADM gets voted on.
Mhm.
So you see, that's typically where most of the violations of rules of order occur. It's kind of rare when somebody gets ruled, out of order for saying something that's out of line, but it does happen. It does happen. But normally it's just procedural types of issues that get ruled, out of order by the parliamentarian.
Mhm. Yes. Oh, I'm reminded that the quorum bullet is not exactly correct. It's actually 1/3 of the delegates on the roster. So instead of present, it's the ones that have been named by the states there. So it's a little bit higher threshold to meet, but we usually have no problems doing that. For Robert's Rules of Order, we do have in the back a summary of the rules. I would recommend that people not that familiar with the rules go ahead and review that. Just be familiar with how we create motions, how amendments are made, if they're friendly or not friendly, and amendments to the motions. And I think that's basically as far as we really need to go for most of what we need to do there. Let's see, what else did we have? There was one other thing.
The one thing that I wrote up here just now was that when people go to the for and against mic, you're on a clock, because otherwise
yes.
you get people up there that are, they're making a speech. So we have somebody on the executive board gets appointed and has got a chess clock at the table, and has got the clock running so that, your 2 minutes is up or your 90 seconds is up. And that's one of the things that, we discuss as an executive board is how much time we're going to, allot. And this year we're probably going a little on the heavier side because like David Hayter pointed out, there's not that many ADMs, so we have a little bit of time to hear things, but you will also see and can detect quite readily when the horse is dead. And that's when somebody will, stand up and ask to have the, go to the mic, either the for mic or the against mic, and say, hey, let's call the vote on this thing, or, it's a dead horse now.
Mhm. Yes, we do that to keep people from filibustering, and that usually works for the most part. So that's a great mechanism to have there. So anyway, I think that's
one thing you might want to point out, Fun, is it's not against Robert's rules, but it's a rule that the delegates have passed. You are not allowed to speak to the substance of the motion and then to immediately call the question. That's a procedural rule that the delegates have passed for themselves.
Yeah, and in a similar vein, like David is saying, like if you're number one at the mic and your 90 seconds or 2 minutes is up, you don't get to start another 2 minutes. If there's somebody in line behind you, they go next, and you have to go to the back of the line to go again.
Yes, you have to go. Everyone gets to speak once, and usually a second person doesn't speak on the same motion for a second time unless everyone goes over a second time. So that doesn't happen too often either.
So an example of what David said is, let's say there's a rules issue that's on the floor being discussed, and I'm at the for mic and David's at the against mic, and I use my allotted time up, then it migrates to the against mic in succession. So it goes for against, and as long as there's still people at either mic that are saying things that are contributing to the discussion, I as the president will let the discussion go on. But generally somebody on the floor will call the question before the president does. That's very typical of what happens, because members will start detecting that, there's nothing else worth discussing on this one, so let's call the question.
An example of what I said, like let's suppose I was at the for mic and Mike's at the against mic, and I speak in favor of my motion, and then I say I call the question to try to prevent Mike from speaking or to try to get a vote on that. That's not in accordance with the delegates rules. That's not what the rule that we have for ourselves.
Yes, I've seen that actually happen in more than one organization as well. So it's not an uncommon feature of organizations. Okay, so let's go over voting in the meeting very quickly here. Your voting credential is your utensil for voting, and so you want to keep track of that credential at all times. If you don't have it, you can't vote. So that's very, very important. Most of the ADMs will be voted on by simple majority. If even amendments to the bylaws, if they're an advance motion, they can pass by simple majority. If there is if there is a bylaws motion that is not on the advanced majority, it requires a supermajority of 2/3. Also, I'm wanting to see if I remember this correctly here. To amend the official rules of chess, it requires a supermajority of 2/3 at 2 meetings. I'm trying to remember if that, I guess that is correct. And then
yeah, that's correct. 2/3 at 2 years consecutive meetings. But if you get 85% at a meeting, you can vote to say, okay, it's going to take effect next year.
Yeah.
Because
So
everybody, I mean, if there was something that, like let's just make it up and say that US chess is going to start allowing castling with 2 hands again. Then that would get, voted on at 2 consecutive meetings if it only gets 2/3 or less than 85%. But if everybody raises their hand and it gets, 90, 100%, then it can be put into effect for the coming year.
yes. Okay. Okay, that's basically it. Do we have any questions? Okay, I'll turn it back to, let's see, Mr. Neatman here.
I guess what I would ask is, some of you who have been to many of these delegates meetings, what kind of advice do you have for the new people about, what you learned and you wish you had a meeting like this to figure it out? So Garrett, I'll ask you first. You got to unmute yourself.
There we go. One of the things I have told people before is read ahead. If you've got one motion up and there is plentiful discussion, check and see what's coming up next. Because every once in a while, there's a motion that hits, no one's prepared to address it, a question is called, and we make maybe a bad decision or at least a weak decision because not many people vote because they're not sure what's going on. And that's something that has happened in the past. And I think that all delegates should be prepared to do what they're supposed to be doing.
One of the things I'd comment on is you see it in delegates meetings every year. There will be sidebar conversations going on, and that can be distracting to the meeting as a whole. So you should try to keep those to a minimum. Another thing that I would suggest is, as I said, the workshops are a great place to get the pre-work done. That's where a lot of the discussion should be held. Especially if you're new or may not be as familiar with an issue, watching and learning might be a good technique at first, rather than jumping in and, maybe saying something that's that you'll wish later you hadn't said.
Anyone else?
I would add this. I would echo David's comment about being difficult to amend motions from the floor unless they're fairly simple. If one tries to make an amendment on the fly, frequently a lot of the wording may not be perfect, and then a imperfect amendment can become basically a way to kill the amendment. So that can happen sometimes, or kill the motion sometimes.
Yeah, I know there are several motions when I read through them, several ADMs that when I looked at them in the bylaw, in the delegates call, that they all kind of, several of them struck me as being of the flavor where more than likely somebody's going to try to convince the sponsors of the motion to let's refer that to a committee so it can get talked about in greater detail. And typically things that are really brand new and haven't been, really discussed before, or things that get referred to a committee. And when they get referred to a committee, you can say refer to a committee and it to get rediscussed next year, or it could get referred to a committee with authority to execute. So there's different ways things can get referred to committees when there is something that needs to have discussion. And a lot of times it's a very good move on the part of the sponsor to use this meeting to introduce the idea to everyone. And then to kind of head off all the negative and discussions and everything that's possibly going to occur that could hurt the motion, and say, and to say, Mr. President, I would like to recommend that, the motion that I and my colleagues have put forth be referred to XYZ committee. And that's typical that will happen. In some things, you want to let it play out so we can kind of see what the antibodies are that are for it and against it. And sometimes the sponsor will say, will then decide that, hey, there's just way too much headwind here. I'm just going to withdraw the motion altogether. So all of those are, possibilities that occur. Mike, anything from your perspective and all your experience?
No, my suggestion is, there are a lot of subcultures in the world of chess, so everybody has their own interests. There's probably a committee, if not a workshop. Not all committees have workshops, by the way, but a lot do. Find that niche, find that committee that you're interested in, find that workshop that you're interested in. There'll be a lot of people that are just like you in there that have the same interests. So find that niche and you'll have a very successful and happy meeting.
Another point I'd like to make is if you're going to offer an amendment, you need to write it down and give it to the secretary. Now, maybe an amendment to a referred committee, that can be right from the floor, but it's not fair to the delegates as a whole to try to make an amendment on the fly and sort of be thinking out loud in a stream of consciousness at the microphone, and then everyone's not sure of exactly what you're intending or the language. That's just not a good way to do business. So if you're going to have an amendment to an motion, you need to write it out, give it to the secretary so that they can put it on the screen so that everybody can see what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's one thing to propose a one-word change, but it's another thing to add 5 sentences and to take 3 out. That's where what Dave is saying is absolutely true. That needs to be seen on the screen by all the members, and there will be Carol, who serves as who's doing all the typing for that? Is that Jen does that?
It's likely going to be Pete Kirianis again this year.
Okay. So there will be a table with somebody sitting there with a laptop that's doing the presentation, because we have there'll be a Microsoft Word document open on the big screen, and that's where you can see the actual content of the motion is there, the ADM, and then any of the changes they'll be done in sort of a track changes mode, so you can see what's being changed, and then Pete can turn the track changes on or off so you can see what the final form of the thing looks like. But that's important. Let me ask, Matt, let me ask you up. What's your question? Go ahead and ask your question.
So being new, and I've been on other boards before, and you get on there and it feels like you're just learning how everything's working. and I don't feel like I'm going to be super effective, you know, during this delegates meeting as far as understanding everything that's going on, et cetera. It was mentioned that we have a 1-year term. Is that something that I can be appointed to year after year so that, you know, next year I fully understand? And is there a limit to the amount of terms that one can serve?
No, the state chapter has the full, you know, has full control of that. So if the state chapter, you know, because just a lot of states, especially the ones that are far away from the event, you know, like for example, the folks from Florida are coming from California or whatever. It's more than likely who can go to the U.S. Open is what determines.
And I think I think that's how it was with us too. I'm one of the few that can go and is interested, but I feel like this time I kind of need to, like I think David was saying, you know, sit and listen and learn so that next time I can be more effective. So I just want to
and there's nothing, you know, there's nothing, the Carol, the delegates meeting is it going to be on like Twitch or YouTube or something this year? You're on mute, Carol.
I think that's a decision the board is going to be
Tomorrow night.
Discussing at a meeting this week. I don't know
what
how that's going to play out.
On the governance website for US Chess, if you go to it, you can see recordings of the 2018 meeting. And that's a good thing to go look at.
Yeah, 2019 is out on YouTube on the US Chess channel.
But that was a special delegates meeting.
No,
so
that was 2020.
No, that was just 2020.
No. So 2019 is probably the best example we have.
So how do I find that, Carol? I'll just search.
Yeah, I'll find it and post the link in chat.
Yeah, and that's to watch, you know, the previous, like Matt, what you asked, it's to watch. You can see last year's meeting or the 2019 meeting or 2000 and see what went on. And it gives you a feel for the process about what goes on. And, you know, so it's not worth sitting through the first, you know, 2 or 3 hours. You want to kind of fast forward to the part where the delegates motions are all being discussed. Because the first, you know, couple of hours are all pro forma. You know, the executive director's report, the president's report, some, you know, some habitual things that always are going to occur. But then you start getting into the advanced delegates motions, and that's the part you need to watch so you can see how the discussions for and against all work.
That was interesting.
Wasn't me.
Any other questions from anyone? Well, I appreciate all of you taking, you know, time out of your schedules to attend this. You know, and if we, and I feel pretty confident that the board is going to vote to have the meeting broadcast in some kind of a way. So if that does happen and you find out about it, I would recommend to your state chapters that people that are thinking about going to one of these in the future, they have a chance to sit in and hear what's going on, so that kind of like what Matt was saying, you get a chance to experience a little bit of this, you know, before you actually go to it, because this is really a lot about some sausage making, you know, in what goes on in US chess. So, well, thanks. And Carol, thank you for
Mike, can I just add?
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of people there. You'll see it on your first day who the veterans are of the processes, and most people will be happy to spend time with you talking about issues and the like. So don't hesitate to reach out to someone who, you know, looks like they know what's going on, and you know, ask for help getting something explained. I think that's important. We're a relatively friendly bunch.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. And Carol, this will be posted on the recording will be located somewhere on a US Chess website, the governance or something, or what?
Yeah, we'll put a link to the YouTube video on the website somewhere.
So if you got other delegates from your state who weren't able to attend, you can give them this link so they'll be able to watch it and catch up on things. So thanks to everyone. And Carol, thanks for putting this together. And to Mike and Chuck and David and Fun, thanks for lending your experiences to this presentation.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good night.